Throughout the civilized world, particularly the Western world, diversity abounds. We see this diversity in our socioeconomic, cultural, and ethnic differences. But hidden beneath the surface, away from the eyes of the casual observer and the merely curious, is another society altogether. A society of secrets, to coin their own phrase. This is the largely invisible world of Freemasonry. I'm Mike Mandel. For the next little while, we'll be examining the beliefs, teachings, and practices of Freemasonry. We'll be speaking with former Masons and reviewing actual Masonic literature to try to gain an objective view of this hidden fraternal order. Our conclusions may prove to be quite startling, but in order to make this material coherent, it's essential to begin with an understanding of what Freemasonry is. Freemasonry defines itself as being a system of morality. The basis of Freemasonry, which all Masons go through, is the Blue Lodge. The Blue Lodge being the first 3 degrees or levels of Freemasonry. Entered Apprentice, the 1st degree, Fellowcraft, the 2nd degree, and Master Mason, the 3rd degree. Most Masons never go beyond 3rd degree. Although if one chooses to go beyond the Blue Lodge, there are 2 routes that can be taken. One is the York Rite, and one is the Scottish Rite. Most Masons who decide to go past the Blue Lodge enter the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The Scottish Rite has 32 degrees. The 32nd can lead one into the Shriners, if one so chooses. The 33rd degree, which does exist, is largely honorary. Author Ian Taylor has extensively researched the origins of modern Freemasonry.
To many people, the very word Freemasonry evokes a sense of mystery, secret society and so on. But in order to find out what they're all about, we need to know a little history. There were many humanist thinkers back in the 1500s who saw the corruption that there was in the church of the day, and they concluded that in order to get rid of that corruption, there would have to be a new world order. They had read Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic in the 1500s was now a popular work, and Plato too was a Greek philosopher living in the 5th century BC, and he too was totally fed up with the corruption that there was in government. He said, if we could have a group of wise men who were well paid to rule over the people, then there would be no corruption. It's a nice thought, but a rather naive one. We've seen such governments today, and they are totally corrupt. But nevertheless, there are still people today, many people, who think that it is a good idea. This then was the agenda for the humanist thinkers back in the 1500s. But in order to do that, they had to first destroy the existing world order. The existing world order based upon the rules of God, through the king and through the church. But to even suggest this would have been seen to be heresy in its day, and they would have lost their heads quite literally. And so they had to go into a secret society. Now the Freemasons in that day, these were craft masons. These were the men who actually built the cathedrals of the day. They were highly skilled men, and it was like an early trade union, and they wanted to keep the secrets of their skills to themselves. Good reasons for that. And so the humanist thinkers infiltrated into the craft Masonic lodges, and they then became the speculative Masons. They were called speculative Masons by the craft Masons because they wouldn't have known a square from a compass. They were just the humanists, the idealists, the academics, and so there are within the Masonic lodges today 2 types of Mason. The craft Mason, who is the genuine Mason and cuts stone and so on, and then there is the speculative Mason, and he's the humanist thinker. He's the person who his purpose is to rebuild a new world order.
Author and lecturer Ron Carlson has dedicated 2 years to researching the subject of Freemasonry.
Well, modern Masonry actually began in the year 1717 in England. The lodge was formed, and many of these things were developed after 1717 in England, and then came to America and Canada as people migrated to North America during those years, and is widely established here in North America. It's estimated close to 5 million men are involved in Freemasonry here in North America, perhaps 1 million in the Shriners.
What is Masonry in the eyes of the Freemason? What does the Mason view it to be?
Well, you find that most Masons go into Masonry viewing it simply as a fraternal organization, kind of an advanced Boy Scouts because their father or grandfather was involved in Masonry. And they get into it naively, not realizing that it is a religious organization designed for very specific spiritual purposes.
Over the centuries, man has evolved a variety of religious beliefs and traditions. Some of these, such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, are monotheistic. That is, they're based on the concept of one supreme deity. Others, such as Hinduism, are polytheistic, believing in many gods and goddesses. But one of the oldest religions is also the most universal, emerging virtually unchanged in geographically separated and radically diverse cultures. This is the religion of paganism, the worship of the moon goddess and the sun god, whether they're called Isis and Osiris, Apollo and Diana, Cernunnos and Aradia, or a host of other names. Paganism is the same mystical religion that first emerged in ancient Babylon thousands of years ago. But what has paganism got to do with Freemasonry?
The ritual and theology of Freemasonry really originates from Egyptian paganism. And the reason for this is that, as we find, in 1717, the rituals and theology were formalized and brought together and formed the Grand Lodge in England. The reason being that there were a great many lodges throughout England and throughout Europe at that time. They all had slightly different practices. These practices had originated from the origins of the speculative Masons, which of course was Rosicrucianism. The Rosicrucians believed in the Hermetic and Egyptian traditions, and as we'll find within Freemasonry, we find Osiris, Adonis and Isis mentioned quite frequently. So of course these are the Egyptian pagan symbols, pagan gods. One of the rituals that was used in some of the lodges prior to 1717, and shortly after in fact, was the ritual of the blood initiation rite. This was where the little finger was cut and blood was shed, and this was the new member doing that, making a blood covenant with the organization.
What happens is when a Mason joins the lodge, he first enters into what is called the Blue Lodge. And the very first thing that every Mason is required to do is to go through an initiation ceremony. It's called the Entered Apprentice Degree. And in that initiation ceremony, he will be stripped of much of his clothing, a blindfold will be placed over his eyes, a noose will be placed around his neck, and he will be brought to the door of the Masonic Lodge. And there a person will greet him and usher him in, and there he will come before an altar. And every Mason stands before an altar, and there behind the altar is a man called the Worshipful Master of the Lodge.
Today we find that when the new member joins the organization, he kneels, he's blindfolded, he's bare-breasted, and the Master of the Lodge touches his left breast with a sharply pointed sword.
And they are then required, with this blindfold over their eyes, to take a blood oath, not to reveal the secrets of Masonry, or they will lose their life. Every Mason puts his thumb to his throat, and he swears a blood oath, not to reveal the secrets of Masonry, or he'll have his throat cut from ear to ear, his bowels ripped open and given to the beasts of the field. And these pagan blood oaths are taken to swear them to secrecy, so they will not reveal the secrets of what they will learn as they progress through the Masonic Lodge. Now, most men will go into the Scottish Rite and progress on through 32 degrees, and in each one of those degrees, they give worship to different gods and deities, Egyptian gods, Persian gods, Greek gods, and they go through a series of rituals. Now, much of this is covered up by symbols and allegories, so that Masons, as they go through it, don't fully understand what they're doing.
In the blue degrees, an initiate is initiated into the Egyptian trinity of the ancient mysteries of Egypt. And this Egyptian trinity is hidden from the initiate. He does not know at all what he is being initiated into. It's not even mentioned.
But if they would read their authoritative books which explain the symbols and the allegories, it becomes very obvious what they're involved in. They're involved in pagan, idolatrous worship, much of it based upon the Kabbalah, which is the ancient Jewish book of the occult.
It is based on Egyptian paganism and the worship of nature. Is really what it is. It is based on the worship of the male regenerative power, the female regenerative power, okay, and the product.
Any historian will readily agree that paganism is and was essentially a nature religion. Its rituals were intentionally designed around the phases of the moon, the seasons and the vernal equinox, etc. Rituals were developed to encourage abundant crops, usually by seeking the blessing of the sun, the giver of warmth, and the counterbalance of the moon, the timepiece for planting and harvesting. From this duality of worship, the sun and moon, light and darkness, active and passive, male and female, paganism developed fertility rites based upon the sex act, and more specifically, the reproductive organs themselves.
This is one of the reasons why Masons, when they enter the lodge, are required to put on a white lambskin apron. Masons wear this white lambskin apron as a covering of what they ultimately believe is the Masonic deity, what they call the generating principle of life. You know, they wear the square and compass, and in the center is a G. You see it on the Masonic lodges where they have the square and compass with the G. Some Masons will tell you it means the geometric, the geometry of the universe, or it means God. Actually, their own books say it's the generating principle of life, that the compass or the square represents the female, and the compass coming down upon her represents the male that impregnates the female. And this generating principle, the male organ, is what brings immortality in life. You see, when they talk about immortality, they are talking about recreating life through the sexual act. And this is what they are covering with the white lambskin apron. This is why a woman can never be a Mason. She does not have the generating principle of life, which they proudly wear on their lapel as the square and compass and the G.
Freemasonry uses Egyptian pagan symbols quite often, and we can see that. And one that comes to mind is the obelisk. The obelisk is a tall pillar in stone, tapered and square in section with a pyramidion on top, and that was used among the Egyptians as a resurrection symbol. The idea was it was actually a phallic symbol. It stood tall and erect, and it was used to procreate, and one was resurrected through one's offspring, and that was the argument. Well, the same thing applies today, and we find that where Freemasons are buried, for instance, very often it'll be an obelisk that's used as a grave marker. Sir John A. Macdonald, first Prime Minister of Canada, or George Washington, first President of the United States, their grave markers both contain obelisks, and sometimes even the obelisk will even contain the compass and square to indicate quite clearly where they're coming from.
But can this really be true? It seems incredible that Freemasonry, this system of morality, may actually be veiled paganism, and only lightly veiled at that. The point within a circle is one of the more prominent Masonic symbols. Past Grand Master Albert Mackey teaches in his Symbolism of Freemasonry, page 353, the point within a circle is derived from sun worship and is in reality of phallic origin. It is a symbol of the universe, the sun being represented by the point, while the circumference is the universe. Mackey states further in his Manual of the Lodge, page 56, the phallus was an imitation of the male generative organ. It was represented usually by a column, which was surmounted by a circle at its base. The point within a circle was intended by the ancients as a type of the prolific powers of nature, which they worshipped under the united form of the active or male principle and the passive or female principle. Paganism recognized and worshipped these powers as the creative force in nature. Albert Pike was Grand Commander of Scottish Rite Freemasonry in the 1800s. From his book, Morals and Dogma, the sun and moon represents the two grand principles of all generations, the active and passive, the male and female. Both shed their light upon their offspring, the blazing star, or Horus. These Masonic authorities agree that the symbols of Freemasonry are occultic and derived from paganism. The alleged occultic rituals and symbolism that are central to Freemasonry were tremendously significant to me personally. I had been deeply involved in the many facets of the occult, including witchcraft for a number of years. Witchcraft is the religion of paganism. It's the worship of the sun god and the moon goddess in various forms.
I was involved in the occult for about 12 years.
Steve Warren was a practicing member of a coven of witches.
For me, that is, I was constantly on a day-to-day basis reading, searching, as well as practicing arts such as divination, getting in contact with the dead through mediums, tarot cards, crystal balls, everything that we would consider occult, I was involved in.
There's a great deal of symbolism in witchcraft itself. Many of the implements used have significance in terms of natural elements, such as the wand representing air, the athame, a sword representing fire, a chalice with water, and a pentagram representing earth. And these would be combined in various manners in order to take advantage of the spiritual forces that were felt to be in operation at that particular time.
And it was heavily ritualistic, with the wearing of robes, the drawing of magic circles, the invoking of gods to aid the practitioner, as well as just anything you would do, even if it was not in a formal ritual, always had something to do with ritual. Even if it was casting a spell, you would always light the candles, bring out the elements, set up your altar.